Hi, everybody, and welcome to Capsim's webinar on how to scale experiential learning to produce career-ready graduates. I'm Bob McDonald, Capsim's Director of Sales, and along with Dr. Eric Deerdorf, we're looking forward to talking with you today about how colleges and universities, and in particular business schools, can scale experiential learning to ensure that all graduates are career-ready. During our time today, we'll focus on two topics. The first is the need for business schools to produce graduates who have all of the in-demand skills required by employers and ones that will be necessary for them to be successful in their careers, and then demonstrate how Capsim simulation-based assessments are providing business schools with a flexible and scalable way of developing these career-ready skills. So before we dive into all that, let's look at today's agenda. For today's agenda, I'll provide a brief overview of Capsim. Then Dr. Deerdorf will take us through the challenges facing schools and the role that experiential education plays in addressing those challenges. Then for the way forward, we'll explore how Capsim's inbox simulation platform can be an integral part in providing a sustainable and scalable way for developing students' career-ready skills. They will then look at how 3 universities are taking advantage of the Capsim inbox platform to meet both institutional goals and student needs as part of our user stories. Then we have a new offer for you for today's attendees, based on conversations that we've had with our clients about the best way of offering Capsim's inbox platform that will allow universities to take full advantage of its capabilities. Then, of course, we will look at and answer any questions that you all may have. So a little bit about Capsim. For over 35 years, Capsim has been the leader in providing world-class experiential learning opportunities to students through immersive business simulations. Thousands of colleges and universities have used Capsim business solutions and simulation-based assessments to provide learning experiences that stick. Additionally, Fortune 100 companies also rely on Capsim to improve business outcomes and to support skill development initiatives. Working with both universities and corporations gives Capsim a really unique vantage point about the importance of experiential learning and skill development. So now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Eric Deerdorf, who will be walking you through the growing importance of developing employability skills and the benefits and challenges of scaling experiential learning and in developing these necessary career skills. Dr. Eric Deerdorf is the William E. Hay Professor in the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship at DePaul University. Dr. Deerdorf is a regular contributor to the Science of Learning, publishing his work in leading journals such as the Journal of Applied Psychology, the Academy of Management Journal, the Journal of Management, and the Leadership Quarterly. And he is currently an associate editor at Personal Psychology. Dr. Deerdorf, or sometimes we call him Dr. D, he also consults on topics of training effectiveness with organizations such as General Electric, the National Football League, and U.S. Navy SEALs. Dr. Deerdorf, over to you.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for your time this afternoon. I'm excited. I'm always excited when Capsim asks me to talk a little bit, to go out and talk to other faculty, other people who are making a difference in students' lives every day. And so they really asked me to come today and talk a little bit about this critical juncture that we all face in higher education in general, and business schools in particular. It's been a little more than a decade now that there have been these storm clouds that have been building on the horizon, if you will, from several of our key stakeholder groups, including, and most importantly, probably employers and students. And one issue that's seeding these storm clouds has really been a criticism about the effectiveness with which we're inculcating the competencies that facilitate career readiness among our graduates. And, I'd be willing to bet that many of you have heard this thunder in the distance, right? You've heard of this impending storm. But if you look out over what have business schools really done, even though we've known about these kinds of pressures for quite some time, it's rather disappointing. Most business schools have really largely ignored a lot of these warnings or just tinkered around the edges. And what's become really clear as of late, as of very recently, perhaps even exacerbated by the pandemic, is this idea that we can no longer afford to ignore this, right? These key stakeholder concerns about career readiness. or put another way, about the employability of our graduates, right? We've been putting it off, but it's really has reached a critical tipping point. And so just to kind of be clear, when we talk about this idea of employability skills, it's a really broad term. And so what we really mean here is, it's typically referring to things like competencies like communication. So think presentation, oral, written communication skills, leadership competencies. So think interpersonal skills, strategic agility, strategic thinking, ethics, critical thinking skills. So here's the classic decision-making skills, making good inferences from data. And then a bucket of competencies around professionalism. So here we think active, proactive career management, we think time management skills, and these other kinds of skills that really drive up having sharp business acumen and acting like a professional. And these sort of broad competencies have been pointed out for quite some time as things that are highly desirable in the workforce, right? Highly desirable, but at the same time are seen as quite rare in the workforce in general, but also among our graduates. And this has been identified for a while, but what's interesting now is that the pressures that we receive, the evidence that's mounted, has painted a really clear picture that two of our key stakeholders, as I referred to earlier, employers and students, have grown more and more and substantially frustrated with our own efforts to train up these very competencies, right? Which, by the way, again, these are highly desirable and rare. So we're speaking of something that gives our students a lot of competitive advantage. Just for example, if we look to large-scale employer surveys, even the most recent ones, it really points out this sort of frustration, right? So a LinkedIn survey of over a million users has found that soft skill development, I put it in quotes, right? It's around those competencies we just talked about, is a #1 priority for companies when they're looking out for new hires. 92% of hiring and training professionals say soft skills matter more than hard skills, right? That they're really looking for those non-technical, non-functional skills. And it's even led some people who really have a pulse on hiring, like companies like Monster, who do a lot of workforce research. Almost 2/3 of organizations are willing to hire someone with transferable soft skills, and they'll train up the hard skills, right? It's really fascinating because they struggle. It shows that pent-up demand for us to supply them with graduates and students that have some of these transferable soft skills, and it's just not happening. And you can see this happen on the other side too with students. It's fascinating in the business school. Oftentimes, we're sort of thinking of what's on the future, and there's a lot of talk about automation, machine learning, AI, and these sorts of things, making the roles of work, the occupations, even more technical. But if you look to the research on what's happening to the workforce, for example, McKinsey did a large scale study. They say, things like machine learning and AI, things that are highly technical, are actually making the career-ready soft skills even more important. Because what happens now is the human cognitive skills, the socio-emotional skills are becoming even more important, because that's the value that we add as people, even in a highly technically rich and technology rich workplace setting that we're engaged in now and into the future. Look, students are starting to realize this as well, right? And so you can see the results of a really recent survey research project by Cengage. Found, look, 1/5 of recent grads say their college education didn't provide the skills that are necessary for their first job. So we're thinking of that, what we call those immediate employability. About half of those students never even applied to entry-level positions because they felt underqualified. So they feel like they don't have these skills, or when they do it, sometimes they won't even try because they lack confidence. So even if they have the skills, they lack confidence in those skills. And put another way, the bottom one suggests that about 2/3 of recent grads say they didn't get enough education. They didn't feel like they acquired these so-called soft skills, time management, people management, professionalism, and these sorts of things, right? So clearly, there are two key stakeholder groups, right, are saying, hey, there's some frustration here. We need to do something about this, right? And beyond the pressures from these two key stakeholder groups, we also operate in a challenging environment in higher ed. And I know that you'll be very familiar with these, no matter how large or small your organization is, your institution. Look, there's a lot of contextual pressure being put on institutions of higher education, right? We've seen declining enrollments. There's actually increasing dropouts. And I know many of you are probably thinking, well, that's the pandemic, Deardorff, right? But these trends began before the pandemic. If anything, the pandemic has kind of hastened some of these outcomes, right? So these are trends that began well before and there doesn't really seem to be any evidence of their abatement with any of the kind of actions that we're taking. And what happens with the pressures from our stakeholder groups, these other kinds of external challenges, it's really challenging our value proposition, right? Over the past 2 decades, we've seen, for example, a 300% increase in tuition. People always want value out of what we do, but when you start increasing what they pay for it economically, right, there's going to be even more pressures to show what is our value proposition and give evidence for that. And by the way, that's outpaced wage increase by 8 times. So you wonder why people really question a lot of the value propositions. And we know we can add value. We know we can. It's how are we communicating this and what are the sort of experiences that our stakeholders are having as students when they're in our programs, as employers when they bring our graduates into their organizations, right? So I know that's sort of doom and gloom, sky is falling, but there's good news here. There really is some good news here. The real key takeaway is we've got to start acting. We have to start acting. We have to start acting now, unless we just risk becoming relevant and we give away our value propositions to other kinds of training organizations, right? Non-university-based, non-college-based training organizations. We really need to focus on this and move on it, or it's going to be too late. We might find ourselves designed out of relevance in 10 years, if we really don't change a lot of the things that we do. But as I said, there's good news here. Look, there's a lot of tactics and approaches we take already that address career readiness. And so in general, the things we do now that address experiential learning, the experiential learning tactics we implement, these directly speak to those kinds of career-ready competencies that employers say they want, but graduates lack, that students are realizing, I need more of that, I lack confidence in it. And so we've been doing these for a while, and there's also a lot of research on whether or not these kinds of approaches work. So there's a lot of promise here, but the real rub is, are we implementing these as effectively and as efficiently as we possibly can? And after doing a lot of research on my own on experiential learning, as well as looking out at the higher ed landscape, unfortunately, the answer is we're not. We're not really addressing this in any real systematic way, by and large, across most schools of business. And so, the good news here is that there's been a lot of research on it. So decades of research, several meta-analyses have shown that experiential learning approaches are linked to a host of benefits, right? They drive up knowledge acquisition, they increase skill proficiency, so not only knowing, but doing. It also boosts people's confidence, students' confidence in their capabilities. And it also relates to higher rates of transfer, taking those skills beyond our hallowed halls, right, of higher ed and applying them on the job. So employers can actually see these competencies, right? So we know that these approaches work, which is fantastic. But we have a lot of these approaches, and there's some trade-offs in how we sort of implement these approaches. I've already alluded to, they're not implemented as prevalently and widespread as we need to, but there's also a wide variety in the types of approaches. Again, good news is research supports the efficacy of these kinds of approaches in general. And you probably have a mix of these at your own institution. But as we look through these common experiential approaches, ranging from guest speakers all the way down to internships, there's real trade-offs when you try to roll these out and use them to really make a dent in some of these pressures that are being put on us by employers and students. And so as you move from sort of top to bottom there, you follow that arrow, what happens is that the experiential approaches start gaining more and more fidelity, right? By that, I mean they're work-related. They seem more business world, if you will. They integrate real life scenarios. That starts to increase as you move from top to bottom. But the trade-off is these approaches become more complex and more resource intensive as well. So compare inviting in a guest speaker or having a speaker series versus internships, right? Heavy resource intensive. And so there's always this trade-off involved in what kinds of experiential approaches we want to roll out, and how do we incorporate them into a portfolio that makes sense, right, for our own resources, as well as for the students whom we serve and the employers who come to us for high quality graduates, right? And so if we think of this idea of complexity and the resource intensity around experiential learning, it really leads to these three kind of challenges that institutions face, right? When they're trying to leverage experiential learning to address these pressures for career-ready graduates. And three in particular really come to mind, right? Going out and sort of looking at this and seeing what's been done. And the first one is this idea, how do we scale this? Right? We have all these different approaches that I just showed you on the previous slide, but how is that scalable? Right? Can we do this program wide? This is really an issue of implementation, right? How can we efficiently and have widespread deployment of experiential learning? So it's not just a one-off in a single class, right? But it's actually integrated and sort of spread out throughout the curriculum. So it's addressing really challenging questions like, how do I source new and high quality projects each term if you're doing service-based learning? How do I form teams and match teams to projects? How do I advise and mentor students along the way? And then if you're thinking of accreditation concerns, how am I assessing and assuring learning outcomes that link to my program level goals that I have to talk about for accreditation purposes, right? These can become real issues of how to scale up, a real challenge, how to scale up experiential learning, particularly as it gets more resource intensive, as it gains fidelity and has more real world feel and experiences to it. And this kind of plays off into a second challenge, which really is around accessibility. So if the first one is about implementation, this one's really about, let's say, consumption, right? And this is how can we increase experiential opportunities for all of our students, right? Not just some, but all of our students. And so key questions like, how do we ensure that all students have a chance to benefit from it, right? They get that participate, that it's spread throughout the curriculum, that it gets a chance to touch all students. How can we help them balance other program demands, right? But there's a lot going on for students. A lot of students now work as well as go to school. There's a lot of pressures and demands there. How do we help them balance these things? Some experiential learning approaches require an awful lot of time. Is it time that students have, for example? And how do we facilitate the opportunities to practice skills in work-related situations? This is a very tough challenge. We're trying to give people an opportunity to have practice opportunities, to apply the knowledge in a setting to see, because we know they're not going to do it perfectly, but they need that practice. How do we build it in? And an already kind of stretched curriculum that we might have. Again, there's real efficiency issues here as well as access issues. Look, even in the most high fidelity experiential learning approach where you're putting people out in real companies, right, i.e. internships, right? If you look to large scale surveys of students that participate in internships, so for example, the National Society of College Internships did a survey about a year ago in 2021, and they found that only about a fifth, a little over a fifth of students even take an internship. Only a fifth, right? And about, it's a little over 2/3, about 67% of students wanted an internship, but couldn't get one, right? And so again, that highlights that idea of accessibility. And maybe that accessibility is also a scalability issue. Can we really put through all of our students through an internship? Is that even feasible, right? Which leads to the last challenge. So we talked about this idea of accessibility, and now it leads into the third challenge, which is really about consistency. And here we're talking about, can we increase the commonality and the quality of experiential learning events, right? So the idea there's a shared learning experience. It's not just a one-off, as I said before, in a single class, or even worse, you only have one professor who delivers experiential learning in one of the sections of that course. All the other sections do a different kind of event, right? Or don't have experiential learning. And so that what happens there, there's an accessibility issue, but it also creates at a higher level a lack of a shared experience among your graduates, something they can talk to employers at career fairs and so forth. Another key question is, how do we balance generalizability, because these skills are very generalizable, but then make it real for the content, whether it's in a finance class, a strategy class, an entrepreneurship class, and so forth. How do we sort of balance that specificity of content as well as the generalizability of the skills? Another key challenge here under consistency is delivering consistent and actionable feedback. Look, let's face it, a lot of the experiential learning techniques we do, even the ones that are out in the quote unquote real world, like internships, there's a whole lot of action and not a lot of learning, right? And it really depends on, well, not just what company did you do your internship, but who was your intern supervisor at that company? And it'll vary quite a bit whether or not a student has the same experience and gets anything out of it. And then take a step further and say, are they even getting actionable feedback during these experiences, things that they can work on, developmental feedback? And it can't just be a grade. A grade isn't developmental feedback, right? That's just an evaluation. And then finally, how do we monitor and assess student development across time, which is something we've struggled with mightily as business schools. How do we kind of track this development that allows us to not only help students develop and take some ownership over that, but also allows us to sort of look at our programs and see where are the touch points, where are the key touch points where experiential learning can have most of its impact, right? And so, we're talking about these different kinds of challenges. And so there really is a promise and challenge of experiential learning. We know these things work, right? We know there's a lot of tactics we can use, but there's some really key challenges into leveraging this as best we can. So one way I like to think about it is, how do we optimize it? Or how do we take things that we know work and make them work better? So this little graph at the bottom right, it's kind of like a moderation, right? How can we amplify the impact of these experiential approaches, right? Knowing all of the kind of trade-offs that they have. Look, regardless of whether you're choosing case studies or role plays or simulations or internships, regardless of the experiential learning, if you want it to work really well, you want it to actually have a strong impact, it needs to have some key ingredients in that recipe, if you will. That experience has to be challenging and it needs to be work relevant. If it isn't, motivation goes down and so does learning. You need some sort of direct assessment of competence. And the more objective that assessment, the stronger that impact can be in student learning. And there needs to be a developmental feedback component, right? Is there feedback there that allows some coaching, some students to sort of understand what worked, what didn't work, how to focus, where to focus, and how to continue that learning. And then finally, do those experiential learning events allow for practice through repetition, right? And so if we're looking at all these approaches, you could see how some of these are really hard to have all those 4 ingredients baked in, right? So guest speakers, how is their practice through repetition? It can be done, but it's very, very difficult, right? Because they're usually typically very discrete events. Same with reflection papers. They're so different across different sections and these sorts of things. And how work relevant are they? And is there developmental feedback there, right? And so we have all these different kinds of approaches, and what we're really trying to do is strike a balance in the approaches we use to ensure that they have these kinds of key ingredients in place, right? And so among those key ingredients, oftentimes you're finding the approaches that kind of blend real world scenarios and that are in a more efficient sort of medium that help meet those ingredients and also balance those trade-offs that you have in terms of complexity and resource intensiveness. So oftentimes a simulation-based approach really is the most effective and efficient because it has all those ingredients, but yet isn't as resource intensive as some of the super high touch approaches like internships and service-based learning that happens external to the university. And so, we're faculty here, right? And, as all faculty know, I think it would be too far afield to imagine that most of you, like myself, have used analogies in our classrooms, right? We use analogies when we teach to better convey ideas to students. It's kind of a common thing that we like to do. It helps our students stretch the way they think about a topic. It gives a useful frame of reference that might be slightly different than the way we think about things. And in our case, it can also help shake up kind of a myopic view we often have of only what happens in business schools, right? Because so far we've just been talking about the challenges around business schools. And it might help to say, look, along these lines, it's kind of interesting to note that there are other models, right? There are other areas of the university that have been doing experiential learning for a long time. And this is the only way they approach it, right? And if we looked at these kinds of areas as useful analogies, maybe we can learn some things here. Maybe we can think differently about the way we approach our integration and implementation of experiential learning. I mean, for me, thinking about it, I think of the performing arts. So maybe you have a department or a school of music, for example, or theater. At DePaul, we have a great theater school. Or think of university athletics, right? So this is the epitome of learning by doing, right? In both of these kinds of settings. And so, you think about this. If we think about coaches and conductors, for example, right? If we're taking these things, both use very, very discrete, clear events to teach, evaluate, and improve performance. Right? For coaches, Athletic coaches, this is drills, scrimmages, right? For conductors, the tactics might be, lessons, individual lessons, group-based lessons, and then the rehearsals, right? Lots and lots of rehearsing. Put simply, or put another way, I suppose, is that students in these areas are exposed to instruction, they're exposed to experiences that span both knowing and doing. And this is a criticism that's been leveled for quite some time at business schools. We're really good at driving up knowledge. We struggle mightily to improve doing, skilled demonstration of that knowledge. It's often called the knowing doing gap. And we struggle with that. And a lot of that's because we aren't building in these kinds of opportunities for our students, right? To practice, to skill drill, to get actionable feedback. Those 4 key ingredients I just alluded to earlier in the experiential, make experiential techniques work even better. Look, even in football, everyone, even in football, in case you've never played, there's film study and playbook mastery, knowing, but then you got to do it on field, right? You have to get on the field and demonstrate it, whether it's at half speed or full contact, practices. There's that demonstration aspect. And two additional kind of compelling points when I was thinking about this analogy is that, there was a recent report that was put forth by ACSB. It was published in 2022, this past year, and it was about the future, the forces that are driving the future of business schools, because they too are thinking about these kinds of challenges we face that keep relevant. And one of the key points they noticed in that report was a real need for faculty to shift from sort of subject matter expert, and that's your only role, which is a critical role, but moving beyond thinking that's your only role to also adopting a coaching-based experience, right? A coaching-based approach, where we're trying to not only deliver knowledge, but create opportunities, experiential learning opportunities for our students, and even use that sort of word like think like coaches. So it's kind of interesting, this analogy. It fits what other people have been talking about. And secondly, I was talking with Bob and a couple other people at Capsim before the talk, and the point came up like, this is an interesting analogy, but no analogy is perfect. So where does it fall short? I say, well, one place it kind of falls short is that if you're a musician or an athlete, you've got frequent games, frequent performances. You got a game on the weekend, you got performances once a week. When do our students get game time? It's after they graduate. Right. And that's sort of that, to me, that starts stressing me out. We're not giving them those kind of practice opportunities and that feedback and all that, this sort of real world exposure to real world events until they graduate. Right. There's got to be a better way to kind of bridge that knowing doing gap in a way that we can scale it, increase accessibility, right, as well as sort of ensure consistency across our courses, our programs. And one way that I would put forth, after looking at this for quite a while, it is really to more heavily rely on simulation-based approaches, because they have those 4 ingredients, and they also can address each of those 3 challenges, right? The scalability, accessibility, and consistency. So I'm gonna kick it back to Bob so he can show you how some schools have done this, and give you a little bit more particular examples. Bob, back to you.
Eric, thank you so much. And thank you for highlighting the challenges that we're seeing in scaling experiential education, as well as the need for experiential education. And I love the analogy of performing arts. Performing arts have practice rooms, they have concert halls. Athletics have practice fields, stadiums in which to hone their skills, to drill, to scrimmage, to practice before the big game. And I like how, how we're trying to figure out how could business schools do that. And so they can. And how we can do that is through inbox simulations, which allow for students to practice different roles in low stakes environments, for them to see how different industries work, to assess their own skills in particular, both in soft skills and technical skills. So you can have those scrimmages as a professor integrated into your curriculum. So let's just take a look at what these inbox simulations are and how they can address those challenges that Dr. Deardorff just mentioned. So looking at the inbox simulation, what is the inbox simulation? It's a simulated email experience that allows students to measure and professors to measure core learning skills, core skills. So using a simple interface or an email environment interface, students come into a day in the life experience of a particular role in a particular industry. And as students are in this simulated email environment, they get input from various different stakeholders in this fictional company. And they have to answer their questions. And as they answer these questions, they're responding to authentic scenarios. So it's realistic. It's a simulation, very realistic simulation. But as they respond, and we'll take a look at the process, they have to assess, they're being assessed on various different skills depending on their responses and how they sequence those responses in their inbox. Inboxes have been also scientifically proven to be valid assessment models. So essentially what's being assessed is accurate. And also there are a number of inboxes that have predictive validity capabilities in that the performance on the inbox reflects performance outside of the inbox simulation in the real world. So in looking at these inbox simulations and to address one of the questions that Dr. Deerdorf was mentioning about how do you integrate and scale these inboxes within a curriculum? Well, inboxes typically take between 30 and 45 minutes, and typically some might be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. But this can be done within these simulations, these practice runs, these scrimmages can be performed within a course, integrated within the curriculum, which is important as students struggle to find time to be part of an internship program. This allows for greater access and scalability because it can be embedded within the curriculum, within courses. So let's look at Dr. Deerdorf mentioned how skills are developed. So having a relevant challenge, having assessments so you get data on performance, getting feedback and coaching, and then also repetition to develop skills. So we saw those in athletics, performing arts. That's the process in which students learn their elements, their keys. So in this case, in an inbox, the relevant challenge, we have an example of our healthcare administration inbox right here. And students are put in the role as a vice president of operations at a healthcare system. And as you can imagine, the realistic scenario is that the VP is in charge of both increasing healthcare standards and decreasing costs. And the skills that are the discrete skills that this inbox evaluates would be delegation, leadership, problem solving, prioritization. So this is just an example of one inbox. There are, as we'll see, infinite possibilities in designing inboxes and scenarios that meet particular needs of your program, of your course, or of your overall college. So a student is placed in this day in the life role in this simulation. The next thing they need to do is that they're going to start receiving emails from various stakeholders within the organization. And these emails can require some analysis to look up additional reports and charts, and all that's important that can be put into the inbox platform, where ancillary materials or key reports where students have to assess some content and then respond to it. So that knowing and doing application process is very much a part of the inbox one. So just in this case, in this sample email, and you can think about what you would do. You're the VP of a healthcare system. You get a notification that there was a surgery that was performed without sterilized instruments. The surgeon didn't know that. What do you do? And so you'll see the answers here are: one, have your direct report perform a root cause analysis, find out how this happened. Reply, hey, thank you for letting me know. Let me know if you need anything. And then reply that we need to maybe perhaps notify the family right away, even though the patient had no symptoms and such. So you can see that these answers aren't necessarily right or wrong. We kind of have a good, better, best approach to these inboxes, which then mimics sort of real life, right? In a simulation, we want to have fidelity that sometimes the answer isn't obviously right or wrong. And so for this particular question, you can see that there are different points associated with these responses. So for A, the solution to get a root cause analysis, you get 10 points. The participant would get 10 points for delegation, leadership, prioritization, and problem solving. So that one gets a lot of points. Option C, which isn't wrong, telling the family, and maybe you'd want to do that at some point, but gets less points for prioritization, problem solving, and delegation. And then the answer where you pretty much do nothing it does not, where you just say, thank you for letting me know, actually kind of it has less of an impact or a negative impact on the skill assessment. So as you can see, as students go through and gets these emails, and they're coming in dynamically, also within the inbox platform to add fidelity, there are instant messages that pop up. And so that sort of immersive environment shows students both what this particular role is like, but also how to apply the knowledge that they learned in the classes, in their courses, to a real life situation or a realistic situation. So in order to have a skill and develop a skill, of course, you need feedback and coaching. And the inbox platform allows that to be scaled up. So unlike a football coach who maybe has to stay on the field, the inbox platform can allow any student taking it to get instant feedback on how they performed in that simulation. Uh, Inboxes are used by thousands of students, so they also can get percentile data of how they performed against everybody else who took that inbox. So they kind of level set where they're at. Also, interestingly, the skill gap analysis can be very powerful for students to understand where they're at in terms of a particular skill set of soft skills or technical skills. In this case, the skill gap analysis, students before they take the inbox simulation assess their own perceptions of their skills. In this case, organizing, leading, problem solving, communicating. Students would say what they think is right, and then they go through the simulation and see what their actual performance is. And sometimes there's a moment of cognitive dissonance when these reports come back. But what's powerful about the inbox platform, there's also the individual development platform, an IDP that allows students to create pathways and solve these gaps and create a plan in which to develop their skill sets where they may be needed. Now, all this data is certainly presented to the student, but also the faculty gets to have this data. And so faculty can see where their students are being, have certain strengths and maybe some gaps or places that need to be built up. From a programmatic perspective, having inboxes throughout the curriculum allows a program-wide assessment of various development of certain critical career skills along the way. So it's a very powerful tool, both for the individual, for the student to get some pretty unvarnished feedback about their performance, but also for faculty, again, to have that coaching role to see where their students are with various skill sets. So having inboxes in a curriculum also provides the opportunity for students to have repetition, be able to do multiple attempts at different skill sets, or taking different inboxes that assess the same skill set but have different scenarios. And so there are a number of ways of getting pre-post test analysis to track the student's perspective progress on various skill sets. So just to kind of take a step back, when we're looking at this, what inbox allows you to do is pretty much what the same thing we were just talking about with performing arts and football and other skill-based assessments. You can have a relevant challenge. You can have assessment and competence and assessment of the competency for certain skills. You get instant feedback and coaching. You get repetition. And additionally, the challenges that Dr. Deardorff mentioned about scalability and accessibility are removed with the inbox platform and being able to have these inboxes across multiple courses and in multiple contexts. So over the course of my career and in supporting higher education, I've had many opportunities to work with universities. And one commonality that I've come to understand that there's no commonality with universities. Every university is unique. Every university has different strengths, different focuses, different missions, different student bodies, different ways of delivering content, different modalities. So many differences. And so one of the great benefits and capabilities that we've built into the inbox platform is flexibility, the ability to meet universities where they're at and help them achieve their goals. So what we're going to look at now are three use cases of universities that are using CapsimInbox in several different ways. And hopefully, as we go through and look at these examples, you'll see perhaps ways that inbox could be applied within your institution, within your college or university. So our first example is the University of Florida's Warrington College of Business, which has always been very forward-thinking in trying and pushing the boundaries of innovation within business school curriculums. The University of Florida had a challenge, and sort of two challenges. One, they wanted to meet the needs of today's students to have them have the career-ready skills they need upon graduation, but also they're looking at what's coming down the road. What skills are going to need tomorrow? There's a high attrition rate or obsolescence rate with skills that are in place today. And so how can they prepare their students for the skill sets that are needed for tomorrow to both be successful and flourish in an ever-changing marketplace, employment marketplace? So what the University of Florida did were two things. So one, they deployed Capsim's ready-to-use inbox simulations, which focus on soft skill development across their curriculum to provide students with the opportunity to assess and develop the key skills that are in demand today for most employers and have been in demand for quite a while. Leadership, communication, critical thinking. Our inboxes, Capsim's soft skill inboxes really do an excellent job of doing that. So that was one of the things that University of Florida wanted to address, but they also wanted to leverage professors' unique abilities to provide students with skill sets that they may need for emerging businesses. So one of the things that University of Florida did is that they've built a data analytics inbox. One of their professors who has 25 years of experience in operations and data analytics, business analytics, created an inbox to bring his experiences to bear and also allow students to start understanding what a data analyst does. And one of the pushes with analysis, AI, and all that kind of technology that's becoming more and more prevalent in business, the University of Florida wanted to have an inbox experience that allows students to start understanding and applying their knowledge of how to address these particular skill sets and be able, from a university perspective, to see where their students are throughout their curriculum and make data-driven decisions based on the input that they receive from these inboxes. Moving on, actually, I said earlier, all universities are different, but as we go through these three examples, they all are in the state of Florida. So there is one commonality, I guess, in this. So Polk State College had a challenge. Many of their students, Polk State has a mission to provide experiential learning to help their students get into the business world, maybe get their first professional careers. So they're very focused on scaling experiential education, but they also wanted to have data on where their students were regarding their skill set development. And so their solution was to take the inbox platform and be able to deploy these inbox simulations, these skill-based assessments throughout their curriculum so that they can track where their students are, what skills they need to be developed, maybe helped with from the university. And they made it simple to be able to access this through their LMS system so that professors can add an inbox within just a couple clicks of a mouse. So again, their use case was, we want to know where our students are at so we can then create learning opportunities, coaching opportunities to make sure their students are career ready when they graduate. And the last university I'd like to showcase using Inbox is a very different, it's a unique university, and many universities have really unique signature programs that really define and differentiate the university from other universities. Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University is no stranger to simulations. They have multi-million-dollar network-based simulations on how to fly airplanes. They have simulations on how to do air traffic control and tower control. So this is a university who very much depends on simulations to help develop the critical skills needed for the aviation industry. However, one of the challenges they were having was to build a simulation of what it's like to have a career in the aerospace or aviation industry. What are the challenges that you face that are unique to that particular industry? And so what Embry-Riddle designed with help from Capsim is a simulation focused on a crisis management in the airline industry, which seems very relevant always. And what this inbox focused on was a student's placed in the role of a director of safety at an airline, a fictitious airline, and they had to balance the need of safety with long-term growth of the organization. And so this is, again, a way of having students in a low stakes environment really grapple with and understand some of the applications of the knowledge that they gain in their classroom, and also have them try out and understand what the dynamics are within that particular position. So again, it's using simulation-based assessments within the curriculum to enhance, to try to develop skills in a low stakes environment. However, you're also getting, as a university, some really good data on where your student proficiency is. And as you know, it's commonly said, you can't improve what you don't measure. And so being able to measure consistently across the curriculum or in courses and across multiple undergraduate or graduate programs is important. And the CapsimInbox platform allows universities, business schools to be able to have that broad-based assessment of where skill development is, whether it's technical skills or soft skills, which are usually hard to measure. So as Eric mentioned earlier, there's AACSB came out with the 5 forces driving the future of business education. One of the key elements of driving that innovation is to have to harness the capabilities, the unique qualities of faculty to drive innovation. And so we've had a community of authors, of professors who developed a number of inboxes that targets very specific use cases. And so you can see, a broad range of what's possible with an inbox. So it's not just soft skills, but also can be business information systems, intro to accounting. Whatever scenario you can think of in terms of business can be replicated in an inbox. Now, we were talking earlier about stadiums for football teams. That's where they practice in. Well, the stadium for many people in corporate world is your inbox. That's the playing field. And so having the ability to create scenarios and be able to really provide targeted, realistic experiences for students is a key of that. And that is driven by faculty. And so as the AACSB report talks about, the 5 forces of driving the future of business education, having faculty be able to drive that capacity is important. And so I wanted to draw attention to one professor who has brought that coaching and experience from his business background. So Professor Jim Crematis, who teaches at William and Mary, was a VP of strategic management at a major publishing company. And he saw that his students did not have the requisite skills to thrive and flourish in his particular upon graduation. So, and he was coming from a publishing corporate company, he knew the various tools that were available and was very familiar with that. But he found that the simulation-based assessment approach with Inbox allowed him and allowed his students to really be put in a role where they had to apply their knowledge and get immediate feedback and assessment. So Professor Kamatis was very much able to provide his coaching abilities at scale by developing these inboxes. And so all the students would have the experiences in a particular role as a strategic marketing professional, and get that understanding in a scalable way. And also means that all students every year can be scaled. So it's not just every year this has to be done. Once an inbox is built, that allows for other students in future years to benefit from Professor Kamatis's insights. So just a quick recap here about inbox simulations. We've been talking a lot about scalability, about providing the challenges of providing skills and developing skills within business schools. So I hope as you're looking at kind of one of the takeaways as we're approaching a little bit near the hour, we're looking at, I want you to walk away with the idea that this is the practice environment where you can develop skills for your students, essential skills, so that when they leave and it's game day, they've been through the various experiences and understand not only soft skill situations, but also how and why they need to apply perhaps certain concepts that they've designed in their classes in realistic scenarios. Why do we do this? and having that practice in a simulated environment is really important. Uh, and so to kind of bring this to a close, we've been talking to over the many years, many of our clients we have over 100 universities that have used inboxes and are deployed inboxes within their curriculums. And we heard from many universities that when we launched it, we were thinking that these would be individually based, sort of small, individually targeted, course specific, professor specific experiences. Well, over the past year, we've had a lot of feedback, and our clients are looking for a larger systemic approach. Many of your universities and your universities in your states are looking at ways of saying, wait, we want to have that accessibility. We want to have that consistency across it. And having one inbox in a course is not necessarily optimum, right? If you don't have that professor, you don't get that inbox, and maybe somebody else has a different experience. And so what we've done is created a CapsimInbox across the curriculum, basically program-wide deployment of inboxes, where we will provide a enterprise access to CapsimInbox platform. Why? Much like I said earlier, every university, if you looked at Polk State, if you looked at Embry-Riddle, University of Florida, very different frameworks. And so we wanted to provide a solution, put together a solution that allows universities the flexibility to deploy and build experiential learning programs that meet the particular needs of your university. And so with the enterprise CapsimInbox platform, universities get Capsim created content. So right out of the gate, you have the ability to implement these simulations, particularly our leadership development series, which focuses on soft skills development, which we talked about throughout this webinar. And also we provide dozens of community created inboxes where professors have brought their expertise into inboxes. So for instance, forensic accounting, business simulations, accounting, microeconomics, all these inboxes can be entered into, and your students can get the benefit of these wonderful subject matter experts and experience different elements. We also including the inbox authoring tool, which allows any professor to create, or any university to create their own inboxes without code. Yeah, we say if you can write an email, you can write an inbox, and author an inbox. So we add that into it. So if there are particular professors or scenarios that you want to have built that we don't currently have, we provide that opportunity. And to make it easy for students to integrate into to have access and to great help with the scalability of this program. Of course, we provide LMS integration with this and faculty training to make sure that faculty are comfortable with deploying these inboxes, and how would you incorporate this into a class debriefing support and incorporating it into the curriculum is what we do here at Capsim. So, what I would like to do, if you're interested, if your university is interested in scaling and in providing access, this universal access to experiential learning for your students, I would encourage you, we have a QR code. It's got my calendar on it. So please feel free to contact me either via email, Bob McDonald, or using the QR code to set a time. And what I'll do, we'll be happy to talk with you and learn about what your particular needs are, your university's needs are, and then design an implementation that fits your university's use case right now. So we're very flexible here at Capsim to make sure that the solutions we provide you meet the particular need of you, of your students and your program. So with that, I know we have a few minutes left, and just to let you know, if we don't get to your questions during the live time, because I'm going to be mindful of everyone's time, we will answer them offline and get those answers to you as well. So, Dr. D, Eric, are you okay?
I'm here.
Okay, so one of the questions, and a really good question, is how long does it take to author an inbox, to create an inbox?
Yeah, that's a great question. As someone who's written a few,
Mhm.
it varies quite a bit, right? It can be, and in terms of like if you want to be the author, him or herself, it depends on how long you want the experience. So So thinking of one that is sort of designed to be completed less than an hour for sure. So with the goal of trying to have it be more like a homework type assignment. And so on average, students might finish at 35, 40 minutes. Most of the time spent is you thinking, right? So what are the key skills or the key learning points that I want? And then once you kind of have those, that model, if you will, let's say the 3 key skills or the 4 key skills, then you just start thinking, well, what are some examples of when someone shows this skill, right? What does it look like? What's the situation? What actions can they take? And what is successful? And what are some examples of situations where they might demonstrate it and perform poorly, right? And so once you kind of do that sort of thinking, then composing and writing the emails kind of just flows pretty naturally. But I'd say about maybe 80% of the time is just you being creative and coming up with the scenarios and the answers. The other part is just putting it in into the platform, uh, excuse me, that Capsim has. That part's really easy. Entering in all of the data, assigning points, and building it. That part is incredibly simple. So, I say for some of the ones that I've built on my own, once I sort of if I really knew the area, I built it over the course of about a week, right? So I don't know if that sounds long or short. I thought it was kind of short. I was expecting it to take a lot longer. But again, that was on me because I was building it by myself with my own sort of intellectual property, if you will. Hopefully I answered your question.
Great. Yeah. And if mindful of time, if you all want to have access to the inboxes, send me an email or book time on my calendar, and I'd be happy to walk you through to answer questions about grading, which is automated within these inboxes, and also provide you insights on how to develop these inboxes and walk you through the inbox authoring process against and to provide you with that information. So on behalf of Capsim, thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and to thank you to Dr. Deardorff for providing his expertise and insights into higher education and challenges facing schools as they try to scale experiential learning and close skill gaps. So again, thank you very much for attending, and we will respond to everyone's questions in short order. Again, have a great day, everyone. Take care.